Okay, welcome. We're back to Work in Progress, and we are continuing our discussion from last week, which was on toxic male masculinity. We were going to be talking about microaggressions and what those are, what it might sound like for those who might not understand what that means. Can be used in many different ways, can come across different to many different people. So we'll get into that a little bit, but of course, with recent events that have happened in the United States and the Capitol, it deserves a lot of discussion. I'm joined with Loive and Sante and Paula. Again, three intelligent women that I love talking to about these issues. And they have unique perspective on these events, which I think help us all kind of process the things that are happening in our world today. What I want to say to start off is really what overrides the microaggressions. I think the events that have happened seem to me the result of a lot of microaggressions that I've seen in the news media when it comes to discussing left and right political agendas. There's a lot of little things that for those of us who are from the United States and may look at news sources in the United States, might have noticed the language that's been used to describe usually one side or the other. And that can be a form of microaggressions, the way we talk about things, like when we refer to protesters as opposed to rioters, these little ways in which we use language to signal our real feelings or agendas. So microaggressions can be tied into the events that we've seen, in my opinion, as a culmination of all these little daily ways we use language and sort of attack people with language that seems sort of innocent, but really has a hidden agenda. And so on our main, what we were going to talk about microaggressions, it sort of ties into that. That being said, and I just want to put my thing out, I'm going to leave it to the rest of the group to discuss. But with this recent insurrection in the United States, there's no other way to describe it. Insurrection being the attempted coup to replace a leader for another leader is the purpose of that. The purpose of that riot that we saw in the Capitol. A group of people who were upset about the result of an election that was deemed legal and was found to be above board, but they didn't like the outcome. It's very reminiscent of an event in the United States in North Carolina, November 10th, 1898, in which a group of white supremacists overthrew a multicultural, multiracial government back in 1898, black and white government that was formed. The white supremacists didn't seem to like that, overthrew with a mob a duly elected government. And that history is really lost because I didn't know about that until after I was out of school. But this is not anything new. And most Black African Americans, Black people know about this. I'm not sure many white people do. But it's an important thing to look at. I'm just going to read this a little bit. It says that no conspirators in that event in 1898 were ever prosecuted. White supremacists went on to alter the state law and to disenfranchise Black people for more than 2 generations. It was also said about that event that the conspirators went on to expel prominent Blacks from the city by means of threat, in some cases under armed guard, and also white politicians who were unsympathetic to their cause. It was a secret plot, but discussed openly, which is exactly what we saw this week. And which is interesting. The coup was planned in secret. The conspirators were open about it. And one reporter marveled that it was done in broad daylight. Now, this is back in 1898 by a large group of white males who were upset that they felt they were losing control of their country. Not much has changed. So I leave it to the group to discuss further. My points were simply language and how we speak about things. I mean, people talk about Black Lives Matter and how violent and crazy that was. That was a cause that was justified. That was a protest that had a purpose. It wasn't about, I feel something's bad and I have no proof, but I'm angry about it. White males tend to get really angry. I mean, Trump had won the election, and most of the white males that I know who were Trump supporters were still angry. You won the election. Why are you so angry?
But Jeffrey,
Discuss.
Doesn't everyone feel that their cause is just? When you say something like that, of course, BLM, we felt we were justified, but then everyone else felt, well, you should listen to the police and you won't get shot. Of course, everyone thinks what they're thinking is right. Unfortunately, many people don't go from a place of, I was thinking incorrectly, and now I'm thinking better, maybe right by most of society standards. Some people just go from, I was thinking right to a new kind of right, and that's not the case. So I think, of course, they feel their cause is just, even though to us it pales in comparison of people being murdered.
Paula, any thoughts? I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I'm thinking about.
Well, we seem to have a problem with Paula's connection, unfortunately. Levy?
Hey. Are you losing me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Do you want to try to go again, Paula?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try. Sorry about this, you guys. I don't know what's going on. I just messaged my husband in the other room to see if anyone's playing video games or watching YouTube or anything. But the thing that I'm thinking about, especially after yesterday's interviews, was a lot of the families of these just radicalized people, is a lot of, like, so the girl that got trampled to death, her family, they didn't double down on her beliefs. They said, we don't, they essentially said, we don't know how she got lost into this mess. The woman in from San Diego who got shot, the family was, like, we don't know why she went to DC. And I was fully expecting anyone around them to just be doubling down and, and saying, yeah, he's right. And they took my family members. So I thought that was an interesting shift and surprising, because, I made the presumption that anyone that's involved in that, everyone around them is involved in that. And that took some reflection on my part, because of course I know people who are down that rabbit hole. And yeah, I have a lot of conflicting thoughts on it, and I'm still, I think, processing. But I think the overarching issue for me is the deep connection between racism and misogyny, and how integral it is to that movement.
Levy?
Yeah, and it's obviously these events are you know, it's all been quite strange. But I mean, for me, the people that like what puzzles the rest of us is that those are people who are oppressed, you know, and it kind of puzzles the rest of us why they would be backing a person like Trump, who is obviously a rich white man who, you know, doesn't have your interest at heart. But I find a strong correlation with what we all know from our childhood days is like the issue of the playground bully. And I think like in many ways, people like Trump, and I mean, we have a correlation also here in Iceland with like Bjarni Ben. Their personalities is kind of like that of a playground bully. And what very often happens in those situations is that like people who are vulnerable to being, you know, at at the worst end of the playground bully setup, you know, people who are oppressed, to people who, you know, kind of feel like they are vulnerable, but they tend to side with the bully to make themselves stronger, to be on the winning team, to back the winner. And because that automatically lifts them up to a different level. And I think that's very much what's happening with like, you know, poor white people who are backing people like Trump.
It's not poor white people, that's the problem.
Yeah, no, not everybody, but I'm just...
Perception that it's poor white people, but it's not.
Yeah. But like I said, the whole thing obviously is quite puzzling. But sorry, Paula, did you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying that it's not poor white people. Yeah. It's not just poor people. That's the perception, and that's the view we have, because a lot of the dialogue is unsophisticated. But there's a lot of money. I know they're in the Trump rabbit hole. They do pretty okay for themselves. You know, some of them are venture capitalists or top military people. Some of them, So.
Yeah.
Well, now this brings up my overall.
Everyone would like to believe that it's poor white.
Yeah, that's the media portrayal, because obviously I'm watching it from Iceland. I'm watching it as an outsider. So yeah, this is what the media kind of likes to portray. Yeah.
In this last few days, I've tons of information I've been pouring over, and from friends, and just looking at what people have been saying. And there's a big picture to all this, and there's a little picture to this. And the big picture comes from a long history of colonization. And that is the white supremacist agenda that we are going to civilize the rest of the world. When you have a small group of people, small group of Europeans who decide that they're going to conquer the world because the rest of the world is uncivilized, meaning that they are not as good or inferior to our way, how do you control a larger group with a smaller group? How does a circus performer control an elephant? You know, if you know anything about that particular, that's been used to illustrate. An elephant, when they want to control it, they tie its leg, put a stake on its leg to the ground. The elephant sees that it can't freely move its leg and it thinks it's stuck, but it's actually more powerful. It can just pick up the stake, but it's all in the mind. So one must control the mind to get control of something that is bigger than them. It is how we train animals that would kill us, you know, like tigers and things like this. You have to get into the mind of what you want to control. And through media, through books which are written, which we all study, and which we all know, most of them are incomplete or written by those with agendas. This has been a white supremacist agenda from the beginning. when I started this talk, I mentioned this same exact scenario had happened before in 1898. Nothing has changed because that hidden agenda has always been underneath the undercurrent of most of these issues. There is a white rage among men, white male rage, that I've never really understood. If you're winning, what are you so mad about? It is any challenge to that narrative is a threat. And it's a threat to the identity of a weak person who believes that they, and maybe knows that if they were to compete on an equal level, they might lose, and they can't stand the thought of that. Whether it be women, people from another country, whatever it is. That's a really sad, weak position to take. If you know anything about history, when people come together, great things are possible. When people are divided violently and separated and have vicious ideas and talk about killing other people, you get weak. It's a weakness. So the divide and conquer has been a tool, mainly now by rich white men, to keep things as they are. So when Americans start arguing between right and left, and you hear, and there's no both sides do it. I'm tired of hearing this both sides do it BS. I have not seen the other left side try to take over the government. So that argument can be thrown away because we're dealing in facts. We're dealing in reality. We're not dealing in your perception. And we all, as human beings, have to decide that truth and reality is one solid thing. It's not up for interpretation. And with the invention of the internet, we have too many people who believe that their reality is right, which is an insane thing. There's only one reality. There's many different people with different perceptions and different ideas, but there's only one reality and one truth. So my opinion on the events and these things is we have to be the human beings we were created to be. We have to use our brains, our minds, with the intelligence and use of facts that we were created to use, not be emotionally driven, because emotions are like, they're hot air. They come, they go. So we need facts and we need reality to stand firm on where we're going as a creation, as this human race.
But Jeff, isn't that also a part of the slave owner mentality? Like you said, control of the mind.
Yes.
Do you think it's evolved anyhow, given off of what you just said?
Because
I don't think so.
I think that the level of control has evolved, and it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And when we, like in our discussion, we're talking about microaggressions, like when Black Lives Matter and I hate bringing that but it's just the most recent and the one that's in my head. But any protest, once you start labeling protesters who are protesting something that most people would agree, that you might want to say something about it. They got labeled as terrorists on Fox News, on a news channel. Protesters. I've never heard protesters labeled as terrorists before. Now that's pretty damn strong. And all that did was signal to people who stormed the Capitol that this other concern of people is illegitimate, has no merit. Despite all the evidence, despite history, despite facts, despite anything, that is a form of mind control. The media has been doing this since the 60s. When you have the majority of the American population who wants like universal health care or gun control, and it doesn't happen. Well, look at the news and what the news says. The news equates everything as being equal, as having equal validity. So we had, the school shooting in Connecticut, and gun control was in everybody's minds. It's horrifying. We had 20 kids under the age of 6 or 6 and under gunned down.
It's a shame because I was going to ask you which one. I was like, oh my God, that's how many there are.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. And then we have people who, you argue that point. Like, no, I think we should have gun control. But if you looked at Fox News, you would think, no, there's no problem here. What's going on? You guys are being a little too, we need more guns. The reality perceptions were just like off the chart. Like even gun owners, even members who were in the NRA, the majority said, yeah, we need background checks. None of that ever happened. None of it ever happened, never came into fruition. So you got to say to yourself, if it's a democracy and the majority want it and it doesn't happen, is it a democracy? Technically, no, it isn't. When you have capitalism and you have the governments bailing out businesses, I mean, I went to school and studied economics. That wasn't in the books for me that, hey, if my business is failing, I can go to the government and get bailed out. No, you fail and then something else replaces you. And monopolies were considered a bad thing. When I was studying, which was in 1999, was considered a bad thing. And they had the history to back it up. Rockefeller, Carnegie, all these guys made their money on very, if not bluntly illegal ways, certainly criminal by today's standards. And, the reality of that and the lack of education has helped to continue that same cycle. And so the education system is at fault. And I think it started when, as far as media and influence and the use of language, George Carlin, just watch George Carlin's anything that he did in his comedy would just totally wreck what we see as normal today, because he laid it out, and he laid it out in the 1970s. He was talking about politicians. Politicians, they don't make decisions. They form committees. They don't make judgments. They will look into it. Whenever they get caught doing something wrong, it's, well, we need to move on. Let's put this behind us. I mean, the use of language is, to those who are uninformed or ignorant of it, are susceptible to being led by it. It's very interesting that in the Bible, which I've also studied largely, it speaks about calls people sheep. And I always found that interesting. But why? And it calls Jesus the Good Shepherd. Well, why? Because people are easily led. I mean, you had intelligent, it amazes me that we're surprised sometimes at the things that happen that are so vile and evil in the world, as if they've never happened before. We've had intelligent people in Nazi Germany back an insane person. We have a picture that proves that people are easily led, because there was one guy, I don't know if you recall this famous picture of this one German, while everybody's Sieg Heiling Hitler, he had his hands down because his wife was Jewish, and he heard what this guy was saying, and he knew it was insane, that he was kind of blaming a group of people. And he's like, my wife is Jewish. What does this mean? And that's a famous picture. You can look it up. But you got to say to yourself, these are intelligent people. These are civilized individuals. Yeah. And in the name of those intelligent, civilized peoples, genocides have happened. And it's not just Germany. It's not the first time it happened. In Africa, you don't even want to look at the atrocities that have gone on in Africa. As far as the slave trade in America, we've had the civilized people kill children, make laws that it was legal to kill children. And history, if it is not understood or learned, creates an ignorance in the population that will continue to abuse those, even those who think that they are above that abuse or somehow immune to it. You know, we had, I'm sorry to go on, but this is the last thing I'll say about this. What was so galling about this attack on the Capitol was white men who love the police, when we were talking about, hey, maybe it's innocent until proven guilty, instead of summarily just executing people on the spot, citizens. They're dead, they're killed, unarmed, whatever, doesn't matter. No judge, no jury, they're just executed. Well, they should have not talked back to the cops. Well, these same individuals are carrying Blue Lives Matter flags, and we have a veteran who joined the Capitol Police Force who was killed by that same mob. So how do you hold those two things in the same place? How does that rationalized? And in my mind, the only reason it's rationalized because it's white supremacy. You have a white man sitting at the desk of the Speaker of the House, the number 3 person in power in the United States, number 3, with his feet up on the desk as if he was home. Because like one newscaster said in the United States, it's because they feel they own the place. They don't fear anything. They don't fear the police because the police are them. When you have that mentality, you have a dangerous thing going on. And it's not just the United States. Trust me. Trust me. It is not just the United States. White men believe that they are God's gift and anything else is below. And it's not every white man. I don't broad brush, but it's enough to keep things the way they are.
As a woman, I think many men think that. Hate to burst that bubble, but I think many men think that.
Yes.
No matter
that's also part of the toxic masculinity.
their skin color, you will find a man that will absolutely think that of himself and treat you as such. But I also think we can't equate intelligence to self-thought, because I feel like right now intelligence is just compliance or complicity, if you will. We see many of these smart people that were there, and we're like, how? First of all, they have the means to just up and go to the United States Capitol, rent hotels, bring their families. The poor white people can't just do that. They can support from Twitter, Facebook, live streams, and that kind of thing, but they couldn't just up and go and storm the US Capitol as they did. Now, some of them died. And like Paula said, their families didn't double down on this because some of them didn't know that they would be so thoughtless in what they did, let alone get killed in the process. So I think we have to be careful about calling people intelligent because they have college degrees or they own businesses, because we saw, like you said, intelligent people do very atrocious things. If you're intelligent but you're compliant, you can't be that smart after all.
And I think we also learn through consequences.
No, go ahead.
And I'm still having internet trouble, so I am going to try and switch. I think we learn through consequence. So if you've lived your entire life getting away with microaggressions, it feeds into you feeling emboldened to things. So understand that there was going to be no consequence. Thank you.
Yeah, without consequence, it's really a joke. If nothing, we see no prosecutions for the incitement of riots. I mean, I grew up with an idea of fairness and justice and the American way and all that stuff, and all this stuff is really starting to show itself to be nothing but words, because you need action to back it up. And for those countries that the America has decided are our enemies, Iran and China, they are loving it because it's proving in their worldview that democracy, you need strong leadership. You need a Putin to knock heads in. You need China to control the people's thoughts, because they're out of control. And if America doesn't get its crap together, it's the end of whatever it was, the great experiment. And the whole thing, I think, the core of the problem in the States is it's supposed to be a country of different peoples coming together. And when that happens, great things happen. World War II would not have been won without Native Americans, without Jewish soldiers, without Black soldiers, without Latin. So many different ethnicities came together to fight for a cause. And
I feel like if you say, I'm sorry, but I feel like if you say they came together, whereas they were really coerced and damn near bribed and blackmailed into this kind of thing, I just feel like that's very misleading. I have to say that because that's not what happened. This was not a kumbaya moment of let's save America. This was, we'll give you this, if you sign up for the army, you can do this. This is more of America being America, bribing Native people and Black people into these situations where they go and they die for this country, and you come back home and you become boy again. You can get hung, lynched, your ass beat in the streets after you just went and fought for this country.
My point of it, of course, there are many ways to dissect that, but the point is that there were many that overcame the German army or the German ideal to defeat that idea. Of course, the reasons why, very varied. I don't understand Native Americans joining the cause, but they did. But the point of that, there's so many things to take from that. But my point was, when we come together, things can be done that we wouldn't be able to do as individual groups. Of course, the outcome after that war, Native Americans were not in any more reverent place after their contributions, which many would say won the war, breaking the codes or having our own code that the Germans couldn't crack, was a Native American language. But that being said, my point is that when people come together, Black, white, it really doesn't matter. Men, women, the contribution, if we look at the contributions of everyone, there's value to everyone. And the reality of that needs to be the foundation in which we work from. And reality and truth also play into that. The history, of course, very important what you bring up, Sante. The history needs to be looked at and understood so we can move forward and be better. The whole premise of the United States was to form a more perfect union, which meant a continuing evolution in the hopefully democratic process. Getting more back to our core when we talk about microaggressions, which is why it's important to understand microaggressions and how language is used to turn a narrative or to twist the truth. Like when you call protesters rioters, or when you say an organization like Black Lives Matter or something is a terrorist group. Okay, but you see other groups, right-wing groups, with carrying guns, and they're exercising their Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. I'm not terrified by a cardboard sign, but a dude carrying an AR-15 with an attitude, that's a little more terrifying to me than somebody yelling equal rights. Come on.
I think like Paula said, the lack of consequences is where it starts because, for example, we're seeing more now that when there are rules for our children in school, the impact or the consequences always for the girl or the women. You know, if you're wearing a spaghetti strap dress, shirt, you need to go home and put on clothes. Your skirt should be what, 2 inches below your fingers, but
Yeah,
you
it has to
know,
be like,
all these things, the consequence is always for the girl, and yet these boys can grab your bra strap, they can flip up your skirt, touch you however they like. And if I go to grab a boy's penis, people would be shocked that I behave this way. This is the problem. There's no consequence for these boys. I need to go home and put on a sweater in 90-degree weather.
Santa, you bring up an interesting point to me. I was thinking, like, you know, when I grew up, I read National Geographic, and I saw the native women, and they didn't have tops on them. But in the civilized world, you can't have, and I'm thinking, I didn't see them having a problem. Like, the men and the women were together. Women had no tops on because that's who they are. They're women. And it didn't seem to be like the men were like, ooh. But in Western civilized cultures, well, you can't have that. So I'm thinking to myself, who the hell is really civilized? I mean, what are we talking about? Because like you just said, it's women who have the consequence, like, oh, you better cover up. Okay, what is the problem?
But
well, you know, somebody. Yeah, you know, like
Arab women get shamed for, you know, wearing their traditional clothing, you know, and there's even laws in place in Europe, you know, that
isn't it
women
interesting?
Yeah, for example, I think in France, they weren't allowed to wear face. It was like, it happened right at the beginning of COVID too. They weren't allowed to wear like their face coverings, but then everyone had to wear a mask. So you were literally in that position where you just told them they couldn't do this, but you have to wear a mask that covers most of your face, and we cannot see your face. Okay.
So now it's okay.
Now, Levi, you've been dealing with the political agendas here in Iceland, more so than I myself, and I'm curious as to your take when you see these kind of extreme politics in the United States. It seems to me Iceland is very behind the back, not very up front, because that would be uncouth. That would be not cool. But behind the closed door, that Trump, pretty good. I mean, I don't know. But your take on it, because I find, you know, Americans are known to be brash and loud, and you know, our stuff is in your face, which personally I like. I'd rather know somebody hates me to my face than somebody smile in my face and then talk crap behind my back, which is cowardice. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my first thoughts when I saw this, you know, the thing in the, you know, was just how did they even get in there? Like, how did they? I mean, and especially thinking about, like, in connection with the Black Lives Matter last year. Do you know what I mean? Then you think, you know, if this had been the Black Lives Matter storming the Capitol, we would have a lot more casualties, you know, and we all know this. So yeah, I mean, those are my first thoughts anyway, when you know, I heard the news. But with the Icelandic political landscape, yeah, like I said, there are a lot of correlations, obviously on a smaller scale, because we are a nation of 360,000 people, roughly. So yeah, 370,000 to be exact. I think we've yeah, we're progressing in that area. But yeah, but we are like the size of a small street in the USA. So yeah, there are correlations. I mean, the political landscape, I mean, it's, I would say it's the same, but on a lot, you know, smaller scale, because we are a society that is quite close to each other. We more or less know each other. Being so small, everybody is more or less related or connected, or, you know, in somebody's family or connected to somebody's family. So I mean, our parliament is so small that it could literally fit inside the lobby of a parliament in Europe. You know, you've all seen it. So, I mean, yeah, but we have the same, like I said before, we have the same characters as Trump. And I mean, we've seen it also with especially with the Miðflokkurinn, you know, and the kind of strange politics that is forming there, which is very much Trumpish, if I can say that. I mean, and I mean, also the role of the media and everything. I mean, because the thing is, in America, and you know this, there's like the political landscape in America is obviously a lot bigger than what we see on the media. I mean, there's a lot of smaller parties that never get any press. There's a lot of independent candidates that never get any press if they're not known already. And it's a lot more complicated. I mean, we just see two parties. We just see Democratic versus Republican. And this is all the politics that we see from America. When it's a lot more, you know, diverse, and there's a lot more people involved in politics than what we see on the media. And I mean, over here, I mean, we have basically four parties that are kind of the oldest and more, you know, we call it the four-party system, and we always have a coalition government. And so we always have at least two or three parties forming a government. So it's a bit different. So in our political landscape, we always have, you know, during the election period, the parties always have to think about that, like, who would I want to form a government with? So they can't, there's usually like two ideological sides, but there's a lot more parties on each side. But we have seen this with the media also, like recently there are more parties. So, and there's more variety for people to choose from. But the media has kind of been, kind of selecting, like if a party doesn't have above, I think, 5% in the polls, they don't get access to the discussions in the media. So smaller parties have a less chance. They have less money. They have, you know, so obviously it's the same element of, like, the more money you have, the more access you have, and the more media you get. So yeah, that's the similarities. But yeah, there's just so much in this. And I mean, like we were discussing before, about sorry, I lost my thought. But
it's fine. There's so much that's floating around. I mean, from when we started seeing, when I started,
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I was just gonna say, we started seeing the backlash, you know, when we started Hollywood with the Harvey Weinstein and all this stuff, and then it became politically incorrect, you know, political speech, and people were getting fed up with, men, I think I heard more from, were getting fed up with, why do we have to be so politically correct? You know, that was a backlash. You know, Dave Chappelle had talked on it very popularly in pop culture. There was this kind of backlash in a way, and a sense of, I think the established power structure was really being challenged. We saw big names be taken down. Bill Cosby, these big players, these big figures in society being challenged. I remember the scandal with the leader of the World Bank got into some sexual assault allegation in New York with a maid. I remember that a long time ago.
That wasn't a scandal. I just watched that documentary. That was a rape case.
Yeah. Scandal in the terms of media. But you know, and it's funny because that didn't do it. Weinstein did it, really brought it to everyone's attention. So I don't think anybody really knows or remembers that case, Sante.
I remember when it came out in high school. I was in high school because I was in my major in high school was law, and so for me, I found this really interesting. You know, this big French diplomat is in New York, and this whole thing happens, and there was a big conspiracy theory about it. And then it kind of went silent, and then I saw the documentary on Netflix. I haven't finished it, but I think it's very interesting because you see before all this happened, he had these patterns that people here in France, you know, they can't touch about because it's embarrassing, and but sometimes it's cute, and this is none of my business. This is his marriage. And then the thing in New York happened to someone who's an everyday person, and it was very explosive, at least in the U.S. when it happened, because we didn't know who this person was. Who was this guy? You didn't really know the maid, but you knew she was a working person. And how does this happen? Why would you do that to someone? But this is, I guess, to come back to the question I had for Lueve, being that Iceland is so small and in the political parties, do you think this leads to like some repressed, toxic masculinity habits? Because I guess as an outsider looking into the political sphere of Iceland, I mean, I do see it, but I'm not in that dome.
Absolutely. There is the same elements, and I mean, we see it, and it's it has been kind of weird because, like I said, the with the strong leader thing, and that we discussed before, we have Bjarni Ben, who is the leader of the Independence Party, but and I mean, they have had a strange following of like poor white men. But now we have the rise of, for example, the Miðflokkurinn, the Center Party, which has another leader who was previously in another party, Framsóknarflokkurinn, which is Sigmundur Davíð. And he is very kind of, he is, a character that is kind of, I mean, his speech and everything is very Trumpish. And I mean, we've seen it.
Is this the one that did the interview recently that kind of went viral?
Yeah,
okay.
It's in the Panama Papers. And
yes.
Yeah.
That whole thing.
And this is the same element that we are seeing. This is a rich white man who has, was in the Panama Papers, obviously has been, in some dodgy tax things, and we know this. And it's just strange how he is getting a backing from poor white men who are struggling, who are, we know are, a part of the oppressed. They are a part of us, they are, I mean, economically, they are in the same boat with us, but they are backing a person who is a rich white man with privilege. So this is very much the same element I find. And I think it's quite scary. I mean, we saw this. I mean, he wrote an article last year that was very much, it was like it was translated from an American piece. And he was talking about Black Lives Matter and, referring to them as terrorists, like you said before, Sante. So this is the same element of speech.
Yeah, we discussed that in BLM Iceland because, first of all, who is this person? Yeah. This is the question that we had when we read the article, and he was calling us terrorists. Honestly, I don't know. What can you say to that? I feel like there's no civilized, no decent response you can give to that, to call people who are asking not to be murdered terrorists when you're digging in people's pockets of, your own countrymen that are also poor. But you're not a terrorist somehow. So I feel like maybe this has to be one of those traits where you just have to open your mouth and say something. I feel like that is definitely part of toxic masculinity. Yeah. Because sometimes they say things that add no value or significance to a conversation, but they feel it should be heard no matter what.
Yeah.
And that is a prime example of one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it's definitely the same element. And so yes, to your question, there is the same element over here. But I mean, also, I just want to get it out there. I don't like the term backlash because I kind of feel like it's shaming people who are, making legitimate claims to their, their rights, their as human beings. So I mean, I don't like the term backlash. I just think it's yeah, because those people who are lashing back are not, they are people who have privileges, who are just, picking the whip up again, basically. So.
And now that you say that, I was actually going to say, I'm actually worried about the backlash of what happened at the U.S. Capitol, because I think we all know it's not going to, there won't be any consequences for the people who actually did this.
Yeah, I mean,
there will be consequences for protesters, people that, organize for BLM. There will be consequences for them. And I find
there already have been too, right?
Oh, what happened?
So because of the activities in the Capitol, you had hot pockets all over the country where Proud Boys were descending on streets. And Los Angeles in particularly, there was a group of Proud Boys that were stopping people of color. And it was, one woman in particularly, fortunately was kind of saved by bystanders, but that empowerment that they had from all of the Trump stuff is and what was happening in Washington just spiked that anger and that hate, and they went out into other streets in other cities and attacked people who had literally nothing to do with anything that was going on. Just somebody walking down the street, walking home. And I had a network of people that were serving as kind of essentially Ubers, free Ubers, and posting on various social media and in direct messages saying, like, if you're in downtown Los Angeles, do not walk by yourself. I will come and get you, stay where you are. So I think that there was immediate, just an immediate spike and secondary anger. Like, to your point, in this particular case, I don't like the word backlash, but there's a lot of bad people in the streets, and it was immediate.
When we talk about when they talk about terror and terrorists, it's time for those who consider themselves on the side of right and truth to correct friends and family members who wrongly use the word terror to describe peaceful protests. Kneeling for your right is so bad, but carrying a gun and knocking police officers upside the head, that's not considered terror. See, now that is the disconnect, the mental disease that I said has to do with a thought that you are better than, because no truth gets through that fog. And if people are silent, that's when people of good conscience are silent. That's when whatever evil is allowed to flourish. And that evil has a tendency to bite you in the behind. It's not like Republicans who had egged on the hatred to the point where they were saying Democrats or liberals should be shot. Those people need to be held accountable.
Well, I mean, they were in the Capitol saying Mike Pence should be shot. Like, they went in there and wanted to kill him. Theoretically, their own person, right?
That's my point. They egged on this thing for years. In Fox News also. They were mad at Obama for wearing a tan suit. They thought that was reason enough to criticize him. So, it comes down to do you see how this will end up biting you in the butt? I try to tell people this about racism all the time, but the thing that seems to stick with people who want to remain silent or don't want to make things uncomfortable is that somehow it's just not going to affect me. My point is that that kind of evil ends up eating you. In one way or another, it will come back on you. And
but there was another thing that happened during the Capitol insurrection. It was that the Republican senators and Congress people that were stoking that flame, they sought shelter from these very people who they considered on their side. So what was interesting about that was that the people that went into the Capitol, and of course Trump later said that they would be held accountable. And so there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of discussion on some of these kind of darker web or 4chan type Reddit threads about how they felt let down, because he said in his speech that they were going to, that he was going to walk with them to the Capitol, and he didn't. And then he came out hours later after all of the issues and said, you guys will be held accountable. So there is already some reflection of those folks feeling really let down by their leader. But the other aspect of that too is, if you look at some of the news reports from the reporters, they targeted the female journalists and the female photographers. And it was, male colleagues that came to the aid of those reporters and photographers. And I just feel like there was also like I'm conflicted about how I feel about this, but the congressmen and senators that were pushing for all of these things to happen, and who then followed their colleagues into hiding, missed an opportunity to address the people who had marched on the Capitol. Like, they could have tried to de-escalate that themselves, because they had a level of authority with those people, because they reflected their own beliefs back, and they didn't. They went into hiding from the mob that they created.
Because they're fucking liars. They don't care.
Yeah.
I think they don't care.
We talked about the toxic masculinity, that false bravado, that these people, blah, blah, but when they're confronted, they run. So, I mean, I made my Facebook post because I've been trying to be as tolerant as I possibly could with friends and family.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday. Yeah.
Who really supported Trump. And I never like to say myself as, all knowing and right. So I
have friends and family that supported Trump?
Yes. And so
you still talk to them?
Not that much, and not now. I mean, I haven't since this happened, because it's so, I think it's so embarrassing, because everything that they criticize other groups for, their group did. Mm-hmm. And, Trump even threw him under the bus. And I said, look, if you can't see it now, you will never see it. And I mean,
well, the next big step too right now is again, like, I know I when I've chimed in here, I've repeatedly gone after consequence, but consequence is everything. So, like, we're not in a position where we can go through life without consequence. If you are a woman in business, or just a person like of color, or somebody with a different religious background, and you're in an environment of predominantly white male individuals, and you make a mistake, you're held to a different standard of that than anyone else. If you make a statement, you'll get canceled by the people that benefit from canceling you, right? Like the right in this case, as far as my personal beliefs. And I think that's the issue. Like, we have not had the luxury of going through life without consequence. Mm. And, if ever there was a time to level consequence for action, the discussions around impeachment aren't aren't just a formality, right? I mean, they are in some sense, because, you know, if they successfully impeach him, he can't run for president again. But it's also the fact that it needs to be communicated broadly that if you do something like this, there will be consequences. And I'm still really reeling and angry about the fact that because they're arresting people after the fact, you know, if they were arrested at the Capitol, the charges would have been in the multiples, right? A lot of these people are now being arrested at home. So there's no proof if they had weapons or bombs or stole materials. And what a luxury for them to have the opportunity to like lessen the impact of the charges that they'll have leveled against them.
But I also think, like you said, it's a luxury for them, and for us this is a huge disadvantage, because we're finding out, like most of us, I'm finding out a lot of my news through Twitter and Facebook. Jeffrey, like you said, some people, for example, they are speaking up against their families. One woman who was at the US Capitol, her daughter said something, and the family disowned the daughter for talking about Black Lives Matter and all these things. And she was like, you know, my mom was one of the people that got like punched in the face at the Capitol because she went there and she's big and bad. These things are happening. I'm finding out through Twitter and Facebook that there were multiple bombs found around cities in the US. I have not seen this on Fox. I haven't seen it on any news outlets. It's becoming very hush hush. The man who blew up his camper in Kentucky, I want to say.
It was Tennessee.
Tennessee. I heard about it, but I didn't see any photos of the damage. I think I saw that once again on Twitter. Basically, a whole city block was demolished, but once again, not in the news. What I did see in the news was that people thought he was weird, but he was a vet who was having some troubles. And that was it. None of the damage that he caused. Once again, back to these bombs that are being found around cities in the US. This is scary. Why is this not on the news? You're not giving anyone a heads up, but also this is because this is white domestic terrorism. And this
in a pickup truck with bombs and guns today. This
fear is, you know, obviously, unfortunately, white people will always be given the benefit of the doubt. I don't know that Paula does not have a bomb somewhere in her house. I don't know. Right. But, like, I wouldn't think that because, you know, I feel like I know her.
I assure you I don't.
But, you know, but in the US, they wouldn't tell us that, you know. I think it's some of the consequences that I've seen from this whole thing at the US Capitol. I went to pick up my kids that I work with from school, and there are 4 people outside the school with these massive guns. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is scary. Why are they here? They've never been there ever before. Never happened. And the day after what happened at the US Capitol, there are people with guns, security's on high alert, things are changing. So there is a ripple effect from this, not just domestically, but internationally. So maybe a ripple is better than backlash, because there is a ripple from these things that happen.
I think we need to be clear also and understand, like, I love history and I like looking through the lens of history. And I always try to look at things from other perspectives. I think when we say white male and this, that, and the other thing, I think there's a tendency to shut off at that point. Because if you were to say all Black men, blah, 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 I would shut off. And I'm speaking on a humanistic level. Yes, there is an issue. There is a definite problem, an issue. But historically, it has always been rich, white, monarchy, whatever, influencing poor white to do their bidding. And that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. And I would like white males, when you hear, oh, white men this, white men that, I get it can be exhausting to hear that, but you have to understand the historical context, and you have to hear what has been said about you historically from powerful men above you, such as President Lyndon Johnson clearly stated, if you convince the poorest white man that he's better than the best Black man, you could take money out of his pockets. Hell, he'll empty his pockets for you.
Mm-hmm.
He's telling you the game. White rich men have been very clear about the game. They despise poor people, whether you're black, white, or whatever. They could give a damn. It's all about how they can use you to maintain that power. That's all it is. And if you are gullible enough to follow along like sheep without using your own mind to look, discern, and figure things out for yourself, you will be led off a cliff, which I see happened in the Capitol. A lot of these people blindly believing Trump was going to lead them, and he went back to the White House and bunkered down. And
called senators while there was a riot going on to still continue to advocate for, yeah.
Exactly. So we're saying to white men, just wake up, don't be led, think for yourself, see what's being done,
and hold others accountable.
Hold others accountable, see how you're being used, and understand that women aren't the problem, minorities aren't the problem. These people you consider to be other are not the problem. The power doesn't even lie in these groups. The power in you that affects your life doesn't lie in these groups. I said it in the speech when we did the Black Lives Matter protest. I said, the most damage done in a white person's life has not been done by anybody of color or a woman. It's usually a man, a white man in power.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't lose the value of your home because I gambled billions of dollars. It wasn't anyone who looked like me either. It wasn't anyone who looked like anyone on this panel. So if the people would stop, our men would wake up to these ways in which we're trying to prove our bravado by following a false idol like Trump, thinking that he's strong, you have to see what he is for who he is and what he actually represents. And if you tie yourself to that boat, you can sink with it. And that would be a terrible thing, but that doesn't need to be the narrative. That's
I feel like that ties back into complicity, like I said. It's not all white men, and like I get that. Just like we know it's not all black men, but once again, it's rich white men controlling the narrative about all black men. And if they're doing the same with white men to get them to do their bidding, but they're complicit in it, and the white men know this, they need to be held accountable. They want to do things like this. They want to feel emboldened by storming the US Capitol, by having guns. They want to do this. So this doesn't give them a pass because they're being manipulated. If you know it at that point and you choose to go with it, you're just as guilty.
And that goes to when we see things like the Me Too movement. It's time to listen. It's not time to dismiss. It's not time to, I hate when these movements come up because they're like, oh, it happened. And then it kind of loses news coverage or whatever. It's still an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go away because, there was a movie made or a documentary, and now we don't have to think about it. No, our purpose on the planet for the short time we live is to grow. Like everything on the planet, we are to grow beyond what we started from. Our minds are to expand. When you constrict or hold something from growing, is that good for anything you know of in life, in science? No. Everything grows. Even the universe itself is expanding. So if you do not expand your mind, your thoughts, you want to hold on to a narrow view of what you think is right, you will find a use as manure, not as anything else. Because that is our purpose. My sole belief is our purpose is to grow, which is, again, why I love these conversations. We've gone long, but there's a lot to unpack. There's so much to unpack. My thing is that I do not like to demonize any one group, but I like to try to get as many voices as possible. As a matter of fact, if we can get a white man on the panel, it'd be great. This is not about...
I think white men have enough platforms. They don't need this one too.
It's about trying to open our horizons, broaden our thoughts, to help us live a more peaceful, so we can understand our life moving forward. So that's my last piece. I'd like to give everybody on the panel a chance to kind of sum up your thoughts about this week, how you see things, and especially if you have anything to say about these microaggressions that might be important to mention before we end. So, Loive, would you like to start?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot, and I mean, thank you all for the discussion. It's been, there's been a lot of good points and things to consider also. I mean, I think what you were saying before, Jeff, and what all of you have been saying, it's kind of, I come back to my playground bully analogy that, siding with the bully is, often what people who feel oppressed do, because they want to be on the winning team. They want to, root for the winner and, back a strong leader and not thinking for themselves. And also, like you were saying, Jeff, about your quote from the Bible, referring to people as sheep, we are all kind of programmed into thinking that we need a leader. Not that we are all leaders, like society should be built around discussion and everybody having their say. A lot of people are used to not being spoken to. So the best they can do to gain power is to just back the person that you think is going to be, remotely fighting for something that, may be in your interest. But, generally it never is, because the people who are in power are, not looking out for your interest, especially if they are rich. So I don't know, last words. There's so much, and I mean, I haven't even begun to touch on the microaggressions really, so maybe we can, move that forward into the next episode. But toxic masculinity, definitely.
That's a big topic.
Yeah, I think we have to change the title of this talk. We didn't really talk about microaggressions that much.
More in the I mean, this is the continuation of the toxic masculinity. So which obviously we saw something of, but I will give it over to you, ladies.
Thank you. I don't know, this week, it's been our first week into the new year. Same shit, new year. So everything I said. That's all. Thank you.
My reflections on this week, like I said before, are pretty complex. Not in any way to analyze why somebody would storm the Capitol and try to harm lawmakers. That's obviously not complex. But the complicit nature of the number of people and groups of people that had to be involved to make that happen, right? Like all the video of police officers opening the gates, which inevitably led to one of their police officers being beaten to death, with the lawmakers that I mentioned before who stoked this flame and were voting against, confirming the Georgia results, who then hid with their colleagues instead of addressing, I don't know, that double speak really angers me. The deep and obvious correlation between all of this activity and racism and sexism, and not sexism, it's just misogyny and violence. It's so endlessly frustrating to just constantly have to see that taking place, and that people just believe that they should stand on a better platform than anyone else just because of, they were, their gender or their race or their religion. I mean, I think we're all just really exhausted from those people. And I think that, again, the lack of consequence, I think, is one of the things that's most angering to me, because I know that if microaggressions are addressed, then we don't get these situations, right? Like you made the point, Jeff, earlier about Weinstein, right? He got away with things for a very long time. And of course, the French politician got away with things for a really long time. And each time they were more and more emboldened, right? It's like serial killers start by doing really small acts of violence. And then, you know, they get away with it, or, you know, people just see them as a nice person, even though people are bringing up other things. And then inevitably, you know, people go missing. And I really just believe, and also the fact that some people get to not have to grow as people. Like, what a luxury it is for those people. I've never had that luxury. I've always been held accountable for literally everything, and sometimes things that aren't even, you know, like issues, you know, like in business or in life, either from a socioeconomic standpoint or just the fact that I'm a woman and predominantly male businesses. So I have a lot of thoughts on that I still need to process, I guess.
Well, that's, wow, like I said, a lot to unpack. I gotta thank you guys, because you helped me to think about things, and you know, I like using backlash. I didn't even think about that, but it's good. It's good. I like growing. I like learning, and I think with everything that's going on, there's you know, I'm a geek in a lot of ways. I love science fiction. They talk about in Star Wars where evil rises, the good comes to meet it. And I think this is the time where I think the people who are usually don't like to be out front or are very loud in their opinions or try to be peaceful, that has been used against us. Because we don't, you know, we're trying to give people a chance, but some people have gone over the line, and the being safe, or, you know, trying to be egalitarian or whatever, has really encouraged, when we should have just cut them off at a certain point where truth becomes, that's just it. So that's kind of the bottom line where I stand. I see language as a part of what we were talking about, microaggressions, as culprit. Again, I would encourage you to look at George Carlin and how he breaks it down, especially how politicians speak and how the news media speaks. And if we wonder, how the hell did we get here? How did it come to this? Well, it's built to this, and we all played a part one way or another, either by silence or ignorance, or, you know, just not really understanding what was at play. And it's good to reflect and review that. But I think now is a time where a lot of awakening is coming, and we need to embrace the time to speak out and to set things correct. There's no time to allow these kind of microaggressions that lead to macro explosions to continue. So for the next talk, we will continue on this and more specifically get into the little things day to day, those microaggressions, those little comments that men use against women. We might use against people from different places. You know, why are you here? What, you know, what language do you know? All these kind of little things we can get into the next time we actually talk, which is in a couple of weeks. And hopefully we might even get some new voices who might want to give their 2 cents as well. So I thank everybody here again. Santang, I know you're gone, but thank you guys for joining. And this discussion is like a highlight of my week. So I enjoy talking with you guys. So we thank, and we'll see you the next time.
Thanks for having me again, Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye.